It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be introducing Arvind. Uh, Arvind, I'm really looking forward to hearing you. Personally, I've read about things you've done. I've heard about you a lot from Urshit, but I've not had a chance to meet you. So I'm personally super excited. Just to introduce Arvind very quickly, he's a frequent speaker at TEDx slash Tech Crunch Disrupt, many places, Future Food Tech, etc. He's been quoted widely in many media publications. But what I'm super excited to welcome Arvind about is his role as the founder of IndieBio, in which he's created one of the world's leading science accelerators. He's been a pioneer in evangelizing the possibilities in the area of biotech. Arvind, I believe you've done more than 100 plus investment in companies. Last count I heard was 136. I don't know, the number may be changing every passing day.
No.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
And this is in the topic of defining human and planetary health, which is so pertinent for us. And Arvind has very recently joined Mayfield and co-leads Mayfield's engineering biology practice. So Arvind, we are all super excited. I can say that for myself. I can say that for the audience. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you. And then after that, I'll have a few questions for you, and perhaps our audience will also have some questions. So we'll use the time for that.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be able to speak with all of you and share the vision and share what biotechnology is capable of and how it can actually help our planet and help our societies. So let me go ahead and share a presentation. So just give me 1 second here to.
Absolutely.
All right. Can everyone see that?
Very well.
Excellent. So yeah, Neeraj, thank you so much for that introduction. Today, I'll just share with you some learnings from IndieBio and how biology can be applied to numerous world problems, including healthcare, as is traditionally done. But I want to start with why, and it's because we're running out of time. This is a photograph from the National Geographic from Australia at the beginning of this year, just before the pandemic went worldwide. If everyone remembers, there were forest fires out of control in Australia, sending all the animals to the hospital and killing wildlife. And those fires have actually now spread to California, where I live. And people are running around California and Oregon trying to escape the smoke. And smoke from the California fires have recently reached New York. So climate change is becoming very, very real. And it's becoming something that people can actually feel, and it's affecting their lives personally. This was a screenshot from early on, March, June timeframe of the pandemic of COVID-19 spreading across the world. The pandemic is not an isolated phenomenon. The pandemic happened because bats, who normally harbor the disease and normally are out of the way of humans, are getting more and more encroached on by people, slashing and burning down their habitats. This stresses out these bats. These bats then express the virus and get sick. And then at that moment, because humans are in their habitats, you could have a crossover event. So this pandemic is just a sign of more to come as we continue to exploit the environment in the way we're doing. This is also another National Geographic photograph of the glaciers in Greenland and in the Arctic actually melting away. I was recently down in Patagonia in the Morenas Glacier, where we were actually watching glaciers fall off of, or icebergs fall off the glacier in real time. My wife is from Iceland, and we went back to Iceland a couple of years ago. And 15 years ago, when I first started going, the ice in the bays have noticeably gone down. And here's the most shocking thing for me. In recent years, life expectancy in the United States has actually gone down. We have always taken it as a given that technological progress moves up and to the right and that we only get better and better and better. It's almost impossible to think of a world in which we regress as a society because we've never experienced that before. But history has. And so we are at a crossroads, and it's because all of this is happening because of the debts we're starting to pay for the past 200 years of consumption in order to feed the desires of a society coming out of poverty. And society coming out of poverty is not a bad thing. That's a wonderful thing. And so that's a dilemma that's actually being presented to the world today. If we have the same amount of GDP growth, the impact on global resources over the next 25 years, just adding 2 billion people or lifting 2 billion people out of poverty would spike coal extraction, double meat production, pulling trillions of fish out of the ocean. Plastic production goes way up. And we have to cut down millions of more trees while we're adding more CO2 to the atmosphere. This is unsustainable. And so we need a new way. We need action. And out of all the technologies that exist in the world, only biology is unique in that it can actually rebalance the energy equation of production so we can produce what we need for a growing planet and still have a planet that we can rely on, that we haven't destroyed. But it's not like apps, right? It's not it's not as easy as learning some computer code, in a 2-week program or 3-week program and off the shelf, no code your way to a solution. We need scientists working on these big problems. Rebalancing the equations of life right now are still more complex than very simple problems. So we need more and more scientists, and that's one of my missions. And biology is the only technology that could create surplus, as I was talking about. Allow us to take what we have and actually create more with less. And that is a remarkable quality of this technology, because that allows us to actually become a sustainable species. And so when we think about the way we factory farm our food in order to make it affordable in the United States and the Western world, and the amount of resources required is just not going to be something that we can do for the next 50 to 100 years. And everyone with kids that are under the age of 10 feel that very acutely. And so the picture on the right is Plenty's vertical farms, and just looking at new ways of obtaining what we need to feed our planet, but with a smaller ecological footprint. And that's going to be not just a nice to have anymore. It's going to be a must have because consumers are going to demand it. And here's the thing. The global GDP doubles every 25 years. It was $100 trillion. It grew $100 trillion in the last 25 years. And we know it will grow at least another $100 trillion in the next 25 years. Every single one of these industries on the right will need to be reinvented. The means of production for all of them will need to be reinvented in order to continue the sustained growth. And so therefore, we have a $100 trillion opportunity ahead of us. And this is the greatest entrepreneurial opportunity in history because it's going to be consumer driven. This is not a technology driven revolution. Consumers will demand change because they feel the forest fires. They feel oceans rising. They feel these effects. And so for the first time, people are paying premiums for change. Beyond Burger went public. That stock is up 3 or 4 times its original price. Tesla, same thing. And so you can see that if you can reinvent production to be better for the planet, you will attain better multiples in the public markets as well. People will want to buy your stuff over everyone else's. And so like I was showing you on the right-hand side, there's all these different industries. Biotechnology for the past 50 years has been applied to one industry, maybe two, and that is healthcare and some industrial enzymes. Biotechnology has now exploded into the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the building materials that we use, how we're obtaining our energy, and creating circular economies. And so I want to share with you the diversity of the new biotechnology through some of the companies we funded. And I'll do one example of each category so we can spend more time in a Q&A rather than me just talking to a screen. So the first category is food, and IndieBio is well known for investing in many, many, many companies that are disrupting food as we know it today. And so the poster child for all the food companies that we did is Memphis Meats. Memphis Meats is the first commercial cell-based meats company. I and IndieBio was the first investor in Memphis Meats, and they are making meat without the animal. So instead of growing a chicken or growing a duck or growing a cow and then killing the cow or killing the animal and then harvesting all its muscle and then freezing it or refrigerating it and shipping it to a end grocery store where people go buy it, keep it refrigerated until they consume it. Memphis Meats had the idea of, well, if everyone is just really consuming the muscle, why can't we just grow that muscle as stem cells in a petri dish, in a bioreactor, and then convert those stem cells into muscle, and then make that muscle into a hamburger and consume that hamburger? You don't need to grow the cow anymore. You don't need to grow a sentient being, an animal that's alive, in order to have the food that we need. And in doing so, you eliminate a lot of the resource stress on the planet. You don't need as much water. You don't need as much land, way less methane and CO2 emissions from the cows themselves. So that's exactly what they set out to do, and that's what they did. And Uma Valeti, the CEO, is also an Indian, and came out and really changed how the world thinks about how we can eat food. And so the world's first meatball without the cow was grown 5 feet from my desk at IndieBio, across a wall into our biosafety level 2 lab in an incubator. And I've tried it, and it's quite good. The big question here is scaling. How do you make now billions of tons of this food in order to be able to sell it around the world? And the remarkable thing about this way of thinking is it's not just removing the cow from the supply chain. It's also removing all the transportation, all the energy for cold storage. You could have bioreactors in the center of a city and have very short distribution. So it's an entirely different way of thinking of the protein industry, and that's what's gotten it to be so exciting. This company is now worth over $500 million and has spawned an industry of over 100 companies trying to do the same thing. Along with food that we eat, we also have to think about the agriculture process of how we grow it. And so when we think about agriculture, we could do things like food for animals and helping them grow in different ways or be safer, new therapies for animals, aquaculture where we're growing fish and fishing them out of the water. Well, what we do is we feed those fish other fish. So we go fish for fish, get all those little sardines, grind them up, and then give them to the salmon we're farming. So why can't we, like with Nova Nutrients, take carbon dioxide coming off a smokestack and then use that to grow microbes and then feed those microbes to those fish instead? So literally using climate change as feedstock for the food we eat. That's going to be a common theme that you're going to see from the way I and IndieBio thinks. That's how you rebalance energy equations. BeeFlow is a very interesting company that has trained bees to be able to pollinate more. I didn't actually know this. Apparently, the more pollen that goes into a flower, the bigger that fruit is going to be. And so there's a number of ways to increase yields by doing things the old-fashioned way, just better. But Agracy represents something that I thought you guys would find interesting. And it represents what we think is a moonshot in agriculture. They are genetically modifying rice in order to have it be able to grow in the oceans, in the middle of the Bay of Bengal, let's just say. And we can do that because it already naturally has salt pumping genes in it. What we're doing is just modifying the plant to overexpress those genes. So it pumps way more salt out. And so Agracy right now has demonstrated a proof of concept. And one of the important things is, it sounds crazy when you read it as an application paper, but you look at the science and you say, theoretically, it could be done. It might be very difficult, but we should try. And I think it's an important thing to remember that there are a lot of experts that will tell you how things work or don't work. But until you try, you just don't know. I'll go a little faster here. Fashion and cosmetics. The second thing you can do to help climate change beyond what you eat, change what you eat, is change what you wear. And so I'm very active investing in this category. This is tinctorium. I chose them because, again, a lot of indigo dye is manufactured in India. It's extremely toxic. It's banned in the United States. It's so toxic. And so it goes to all these developing nations, which is terrible, just outsourcing that externality. So tinctorium has created a way of fixing indigo enzymatically. And in doing so, it becomes completely clean and completely sustainable. And so I'm extremely excited about them to be able to create a sustainable jeans and fashion line. Durable goods and materials. These are companies that are rebuilding the way we look at things, from Carbix, which is doing cement using, again, waste CO2 streams, and fixing that waste CO2 within the carbonates, to plastics that melt in the oceans. But I selected Aviso Myco because they're from India, and they discovered melanin being expressed in a certain fungus that they found in the jungles of southern India. And it's a remarkable fungus, and it's a remarkable molecule. Melanin is, of course, the pigment in our skin, and it soaks up UV rays. The amazing thing about that is now you could make an all-natural sunscreen, but more importantly, for their business model, they could sell it at extremely high prices to aerospace companies that are using it to coat their satellites and airplanes in order to help protect their aerospace products from the sun's UV radiation. That's much lighter in weight. And then utilities and energy. Thinking through economies, we need to be able to produce energy very efficiently. And the best way to do that is to take all the waste we produce, either from that energy source or from the rest of our society, and use that to create more energy and really truly create a circular economy. Electroactive is a company out of the Oak Tree National Lab, which is where the nuclear reactor was invented in the United States. And they have invented a bioreactor that uses living electrogens, bacteria that can fix electricity in essence, to create an electrical gradient that they use to drive hydrolysis, the breaking up of H2O, into hydrogen gas. And that hydrogen gas could then be collected and used to power buses, municipal buses, municipal forklifts, things like that. And so there's a full circular economy that comes from collecting people's organic waste streams and using that to create these combustible gas driven clean vehicles. And then finally, healthcare. Healthcare is such a massive industry in and of itself. We've done a lot of investments in it, as you can see. But I will choose to share with you Convalesce. And I choose Convalesce because, again, they came out of IIT as an undergrad and went on to do their PhD in India as well. And Shubhadeep invented a gel that holds stem cells into place and it tricks those stem cells into believing they're in the brain. And when those stem cells believe in their brain, they differentiate into neurons. They then take this little plug of gel and neurons and stick it into the substantia nigra, which is this little pocket in the center of your brain that gets destroyed by Parkinson's disease. And by sticking this plug into that little pocket, all the neuronal connections can be repaired, relieving the patient of Parkinson's disease and the tremors that come with it. So this therapy is moving through preclinical, but again, incredible innovation coming out of India. And so all of these companies, right, they seem outlandish, but they create real value. This presentation is already outdated. Or I should say the slide is outdated. It's now $3.2 billion is the net value of all of the companies in the IndieBio portfolio. 5 years ago, none of these companies exist. 6 years ago, none of these companies existed. And so it shows you the incredible traction and the incredible demand for these technologies. But for me, as the founder of IndieBio, it shows the idea that scientists could be entrepreneurs is absolutely right. And that was something that everyone rejected prior to IndieBio. Prior to IndieBio, the dogma was scientists are not the entrepreneurs. They invent something in the lab. They stay in the lab where they belong. And then we give that invention to professionals to go turn into a company. I don't believe that because I believe scientists are extremely creative and very driven by the definition of them being able to achieve what they've achieved. And so if we just trust them, that we could teach them how to build a business, which is what IndieBio does, they can go on to do great things. And that's what's been happening. The other big thing that everyone believes is true, which just isn't, is that biotech is expensive. It's not that expensive. I could order DNA from a website on IDT that looks like Amazon. It add to cart and it comes to me in 48 hours or 24 if I want express shipping. Biotech has completely changed from the 25 years ago when I did it in the late 90s. And so when you have scientists that can learn how to do entrepreneurship and biotech that isn't that expensive, i.e., failing is not expensive, you could now take on different risks and you can look at biology beyond therapeutics, which was the third thing that everyone believed. Oh, life sciences, that's drug making. Well, no, we can use life sciences to reinvent how we eat. But by lowering the cost of trying that experiment, that is how we could then explore. And like I said earlier, experts will tell you what isn't possible, but nobody knows until you try. And experts have a very strong tendency of being wrong at what they don't know. So building a lab, which everyone can share, was the key of making it cheaper. IndieBio's lab is about 7,000 square feet. It has a BSL 1 and 2 lab, which means you could do infectious diseases. And we have staff to help maintain everything. But really, I talked about the entrepreneurs, and the scientists are the stars and the heroes of the program. And so how do we help them become entrepreneurs? That's a big question. Well, there's a structured program. My background is in design as well as genetic engineering. And so I fuse the two in order to create a program to help scientists be able to build businesses. And roughly it looks like this. De-risking the value proposition in the beginning is the most important thing. Will the consumer want it? 2, once you understand what the consumer wants, you focus on building the product. And then 3, once you build the product, what's the business model? How do you actually give it to people and get paid in a way that maximizes your return for the value you've created? Most people disregard the business model part. And the business model part is the difference oftentimes between success and failure. Because making sure you have a business model that is sustainable and can create large outcomes is what gets investors to come in and invest in biotech companies, which can often be pre-product for a long time. And so broadly, the best practices of building biotech companies is using what I call product-directed discovery. So this is this is an interesting concept. I'll actually say it through an example. Most people will say, oh, okay, if we're going to express a certain, like three different proteins and then mix them together to make a product, most people would start working on all three chassis, genetically modifying all three bacteria to make those proteins and to get enough of the product to make what their final product wants to be, right? Well, there's a better way than that. Why don't you just buy those purified proteins off the shelf and then formulate until you're certain that the final product is what your customer wants? Once you know that for certain, you could now spend the time and energy in creating the cellular factories to make those products. And so not thinking of everything as a science project, but thinking of everything as a product development program. By reprogramming our minds in that way, we can get to better products faster. And that's what allows you to do this. And this is something that I say all the time in the basement. The basement is where the IndieBio lab's in a basement. And so I say sales solves everything. If you have a problem, go make a sale, right? Some investor doesn't want to give you money, go make a sale. And here you can see we have a very strong focus. It's an 18-week program. At week 16, Amaryllis finally figured out how to sell product and made over $250,000 of real sales and $375,000 of bookings. So getting to that revenue is the best proof point that your company has a product that people want. So what's next for the world? Well, at IndieBio, we're working, and now at Mayfield, I'm working really hard to look for technologies that are using carbon capture to reverse climate change. I mentioned a couple: Carbix, making cement; Novo Nutrients, using carbon capture to feed fish. So what are all the different ways we can use carbon that we're capturing in order to reverse this climate change and sequester it away from the atmosphere? How do we create new food supplies to feed our planet without destroying it? Everyone deserves to have good, high quality food. People coming out of poverty, the first thing they would demand, it's well documented, is high quality protein. How do we do that sustainably? I believe fertility and birth control, that whole segment is really about gender equality. And over time, contraception and fertility technologies have led to greater and greater freedom for women. And as we continue looking at how to have healthier children at the time of our choosing, we create a more equal society and a better society. And how do we eradicate disease with lower cost approaches? It's not just about super expensive CAR T therapies in the United States for a select few people. Right? That's not what interests me as a person. Right? I think that's important, but real success comes when you can distribute medicines and therapies to everyone in the world in a way that everyone can afford it. That's truly world changing. Likewise, what are some regenerative approaches, to eliminate even surgery? I think in 200 years, in 100 years, 50 years, hopefully, if I'm optimistic, we'll look back and we'll say, can you believe people used to be cut open in order to fix what's wrong inside of them? The same way we think back to the 1200s. Oh yeah, we used to cut holes in people's heads to bleed them out in order to make them feel better. We laugh about that now. What are the things about our current healthcare practice we'll laugh about one day? It's very humbling for me to think that way. Sustainable materials and production. I've talked about this a lot, but this is Lingrove. That's not wood. That's flax. It was spun, woven, and turned into something that people can put on their walls and feel good that they're not contributing to climate change. I talked about the bats. I'm a big fan of bats now, as I've learned about them. And they are a true link between human and planetary health. And so for me, thinking about biodiversity as a metric, as much as CO2 is a metric in people's minds, people aren't talking about biodiversity on the planet. We need this biodiversity to keep us safe from climate change. As we all know from the meteor, the more specialized we are to an environment and the more narrow the diversity of the planet, when the planet changes, those brittle species die very fast. And biodiversity is the only thing that can ensure from that change. And then finally, the ocean covers 70% of the planet and yet is owned by nobody. And so therefore is nobody's problem. And that is probably one of the biggest problems with our planet today. The majority of life on the planet is under the ocean. And the ocean is acidifying very rapidly. It's also the biggest CO2 sink on the planet. And so how do we go and save coral? And how do we actually understand how to address the issues that are happening in our ocean and our oceans around the world in a way that's collective? Because this is the sneaking problem that's going to come up on everyone before it's too late, because no one's really looking since no one owns them. And then finally, along those lines, and I think this is something that's very important for India, especially, is clean water for everyone. It's it's just remarkable how much we take for granted clean water in the West. I go hiking and backpacking a lot. And so, whenever you just can't turn on a faucet, get clean water, you go and appreciate it. And I think this is a basic need that, like freedom, everyone should have. And so we should work hard to understand it. So that's what I am working tirelessly for. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to listen more to this kind of stuff, you can follow me on Twitter or Instagram at Arvind Gupta. I just wrote a book called Decoding the World. I just knocked over a lamp as well, and I should have had this. I should have had the book handy, but I don't. Classic. Anyway, Decoding the World, you could go out and get it. And it's about a lot of the things that I just talked about through many of the examples I talked about. So I'll stop sharing and I'll say thank you very much for listening.
Arvind, that was truly awe-inspiring.
Thank you.
If even a fraction of those things go to scale, we'll be living in a very different world, and I'm assuming chances are many of them will go to scale. So look, I was tracking the questions from the audience, so I want to pick 3, and maybe we take shorter answers to these questions so that we can get more through as well.
That would be great. I can do rapid fire for you.
Yeah, so you talked about climate change as feedstock. That'll be, I track climate change and this 2 degrees centigrade increase and net zero. So Can that truly be done at scale? Because that can be incredibly revolutionary. Or how far are we from doing that at scale?
We're getting closer, faster. I mean, unfortunately, CO2 is being emitted at scale. And so we just
for a long time.
So we just need these traps, and these traps are happening. It's chemistry. This is stuff that is engineering. It's not basic science. So it's scaling very, very quickly. What the thing that takes a long time are people's minds to change. And then once people change their mind, the technology happens very quickly.
Because that can truly be, okay, great. There was a question about, is this more, you gave a bunch of examples which are relevant for India, being done by folks in India. But do you think and you said your lab is 7,000 square feet and it's got all the whatever approvals, etc. Do you
Sure.
think this is something which is going to be more the prerogative of the West in the short term, or do you think India and other emerging countries can truly do this at scale as well?
No, India and other countries can do this at scale far faster. I mean, this is the thing. There's incredible talent in India. This is why I'm so excited for Plaksha. I'm very excited in general for India and want to come back and help build some of these things as best as I can, because the talent in India is and the creativity of Indians is such that it doesn't take, like I said, it just takes a frame of mind. The rest is easy. Once you know, okay, let's try. It's not about failing big. It's about failing little, right? That's what I mean, right? Like failure it's funny. In England, in Britain, it's all about your accent. Who's your family? In New York, it's all about your resume. Where did you go to school? In California, in San Francisco, it's all about what have you done, right? So in India, like what I say about mind shift change, right? How do we get to, it's all about what you've done as fast as possible, because then everyone's not afraid of trying something, because trying something is as important, or if not more important, than what university did you go to.
So you're saying it's really a mindset issue. There is no threshold of, it needs cleaner labs, it needs a certain enabling environment, none of that stuff.
It needs a kitchen. It needs a kitchen. You could do this. 90% of what I talked about, you could do literally in your kitchen. You don't need a lab. I built a lab.
Or the DNA that the genome sequence you can order on the cart. Can you do that anywhere?
Yes. In India, right? Type it in IDT. There's services everywhere for it. Illumina sequencing. Almost so much of it is outsourced, right? So it takes a frame of mind and creativity more so than a pipette. And I think that's just something to really internalize. Because as you know, my dad used to always say to me, right, growing up, when there's a will, where there's a will, there's a way. Yeah, right.
There's a highway, as they say. Where there's a will, there's a highway.
So that's all. I think that's the key. And once you have the mind shift, and it's not all about like, okay, I can't fail because it'll go on my record, right? That I tried something and it didn't work. It goes on my record. Oh no. That doesn't matter.
That bit is beginning to happen a fair bit. Yeah. I mean, we've had, so I'm also curious, what's the genesis of the company being called IndieBio? It's just.
So IndieBio is short for independent biology. So I started it as the third wave for biologists. So in the beginning, there was either you could become a professor, right? And there's no professorships left because no one's retiring. Everyone's living forever. And then you could go like work for Genentech and, do pipetting like a human robot. And, neither of those are very appealing for anyone creative. So what I called IndieBio, called it IndieBio as independent biology.
Got it.
For you to be able to do it on your own. And so that's what I mean. Like the lab I built was done for shoestring budget, $250,000 for the first one, which is nothing. If you know about building labs, everything is bought secondhand, cheap. You have to rebuild a motor here and there, which we did.
No, so there's one more question which comes up when you listen to a topic like this, when you talk about stem cells, etc. While there's a lot of good you can put this to, is it also putting too much power in the hand of humans? And there's a side of it which is not so good. And how do you, as I hear about COVID, you could also say that the same pandemic could be created by three guys in a lab, or whatever, if they wanted to put their mind to bad use. I'm not, do you subscribe to that? Do you think there need to be enough checks and balances in this incredibly potent tool that mankind will have with itself?
It's a great question. A couple million years ago, there were some guys in a cave, some people in a cave, and they were like, this fire thing is going to be big, right? Like fire is really great, but it's dangerous, it could burn stuff down. It's like, fire is hot. Should we keep fire from everyone else? Right? This is a technology that can revolutionize the way we live and all of this, like I've mentioned. In the same exact way, it's not as dangerous as people think. People just don't understand it yet. We don't think fire is dangerous anymore because we could control it and we understand. Like one of the first things kids learn, don't touch a stove, it's hot. Like, okay, done. And so it's incredibly hard for three guys in a basement to make a deadly pathogen. It's almost impossible. You can't order the genes for pathogenic diseases. Everything is flagged on databases. There are a lot of safeguards in place. And it's really hard to do. Like entire states, like nations, put hundreds of millions of dollars of resources to developing something like that. With all their means of disposal. Three people in a basement. It sounds like a good movie, but unfortunately, it's not a movie that's realistic.
Got it. No, that's so. That's very helpful and very encouraging to hear. One more question, which is coming up: how many of these companies that you mentioned, great stories, are beginning to be cash flow positive? Or is the cycle to become cash flow positive typical as other startups? Is it less? Is it more? How would you characterize it?
Great question. So they take a lot longer to be cash flow positive. In the planetary health, what I call planetary health, which is all the companies that are good for the planet versus human health, all the good, companies that are trying to solve for healthcare, they tend to get to cash flow positive earlier. So many of our companies on that side are profitable and able to sustain themselves. Others could be profitable, but they're taking venture capital to grow faster. On the human healthcare side, diagnostics, things like that, we have companies that are making, I have a COVID diagnostic company that's making millions of dollars a month. And so, again, it's about having an idea, seeing a hole in the market, and then going after it. The COVID diagnostic company saw that the PCR test that everyone was using could be simplified into fewer steps and just go faster. And so they just offered that. And then San Francisco turned around and said, hey, can you help us deploy testing? So it's about being fast in your mind. The rest is just doing, right? And I think, I keep overemphasizing this idea of we are products of what we believe we can do. And I think that's the most important hurdle. In the book I wrote, there's a line that I use to talk about this, which is 99% of censorship is self-censorship.
Arvind, this has been an incredibly inspiring session, and truly, and such exciting examples from growing rice in the Bay of Bengal to indigo manufacturing, denim. I know the largest denim manufacturers are in India. I know a couple of them, and they talk about how polluting it is for the water. Yes. Because that's why they don't make denim anywhere else in the world, and that's why it gets manufactured. So that, if you're Tinctinium, if I caught that name right, that's.
Tinctinium is now called Hue, Hue. And I will check them with you because it's I had India in mind when I invested in them.
Yeah, it can be incredibly important. Yeah. I mean, and then making cement and other durable things out of carbon. Connell says, Parkinson's disease, boy, this is like a whole new world. So I can go on and on. I'm just conscious of the time, and I would, I don't know if you had any closing comments to make, but decoding the world. Thanks for the plug on that. I'm sure we will all go on to read it. And at Plaksha, we are incredibly excited. We are offering this as a major in the very first year, the whole biosystems engineering, and we are excited about the possibility that exists. But if you had any closing words to say to the group, would love to hear you.
Sure. I think again, to a group of incredibly gifted and thoughtful people, I think about my work through my tombstone. One day I'm going to die, and then all the companies that I've invested in will go on that tombstone. And just by that, you will know who I am as a person. In the same way, when you're making a decision, for me, that's an important or a helpful framing, because one day I can look, it allows me to think long-term, right? And make decisions today based on 20-year time horizons. versus getting caught up in the turbulence of the moment. And so my wife and I, we have a rule we call the 20-year rule, which is when we're trying to decide, should we do something? Should we move to China for 3 years, or should we stay here and work on our careers? We both said, well, what do we remember in 20 years? What will we remember? And so we're like, oh, we'll remember going to China. So let's go to China. So, and I think like that's a helpful thing. Like, should we start a company or not? What are you going to remember in 20 years? All the things you learn in that struggle and that growth, it's a no-brainer to me. So that's, I would say, because all of you are at this inflection point in your life where a lot of big decisions are made within a short amount of time and they set courses, right? So, maybe that could be somewhat helpful from, I don't have any answers. That's the other thing. I only have questions. And so that's hopefully a little bit helpful. It's certainly not an answer to any of life's questions.
As both Socrates and Plato said, having the right question is often the hardest thing. So I think asking questions is good. And the 20-year rule is a good way to live life. So thank you for sharing that as well. I think with that, Arvind will probably bring this to a close and hand it back to Pallavi.
Yes.
I love this. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for inspiring us. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay. I will hopefully speak to you guys soon. I'm sorry, Pallavi.
No, thank you so much, Arvind. That was really, really a fascinating presentation. I think no words would do justice to it. And as you know, the theme of this conference is it's infinity, and you've really opened people's minds to infinite possibilities with biotech, things that nobody would have considered possible, and really encouraging everyone to break boundaries, think about that. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Neeraj, for being a fabulous host, as always. I know how passionate you yourself are on this topic, and it was great to have both of you in this session together.
It was incredible fun. Arvind, once again, have a great
Likewise.
day ahead, and thank you again for joining.
Okay. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.